Marcus Cole had never expected to inherit anything from his grandfather, because the old man had been a stranger to him for most of his life. And when the message came through the station's communication system, he almost deleted it without reading. The year was 2347, and Marcus worked as a salvage operator on Orbital Station Theta 9, a rusting collection of metal tubes and worn corridors that floated above a dying planet. And his job was simple enough, as he spent his days pulling apart broken ships and selling the parts to whoever would buy them. He was 32 years old, and he had never left this sector of space, and he had never wanted to, because the galaxy was a vast and dangerous place where humans were considered nothing more than newcomers, primitive creatures who had only recently discovered how to travel between stars, while other species had been doing it for millions of years. The message informed him that Elias Cole had died 3 weeks ago on a remote moon at the edge of known space, and the only thing the old man had left behind was a ship called the Vagrant Dawn. Marcus laughed when he read this, because everyone knew that his grandfather had been a failure, a dreamer who had spent his entire life chasing mysteries that did not exist, and a ship from such a man would probably be worth less than the fuel it would take to fly it. But he went to claim it anyway, because he had nothing better to do, and because some small part of him wanted to see what his grandfather had considered worth keeping. The Vagrant Dawn sat in a private docking bay that had cost more to rent than Marcus made in 6 months. And when he first saw the ship, he understood why people had called his grandfather a fool. It was a Class 4 freighter, a model so old that most people had never even heard of it, and its hull was covered in patches and repairs that told the story of 100 close calls and desperate escapes, to a dull gray that made it look like a ghost ship from ancient times. Marcus walked up the boarding ramp and stepped inside, expecting to find dust and decay and the smell of abandonment. But instead he found something that surprised him. The interior was clean and well-maintained, the lights worked perfectly, and the air smelled fresh, as if someone had been living here just yesterday. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Cole," a voice said from the shadows, and Marcus jumped back in shock as a figure emerged from a doorway at the end of the corridor. It was a robot, but not like any robot Marcus had ever seen before, because this one was old, truly old, with a boxy frame and dented metal plating and optical sensors that flickered with a faint blue light. "I am Keeper 7, the robot said in a formal voice that sounded like it belonged to another era. "But your grandfather called me K7, and I have been waiting for you." Marcus stared at the machine and tried to understand what he was seeing, because robots like this had not been manufactured for over a century, and yet this one moved smoothly and spoke clearly as if it had just rolled off an assembly line. "You maintained this ship?" Marcus asked, and K7 nodded his metal head slowly. "I have served aboard the Vagrant Dawn for many years, Mr. Cole, and it was my honor to assist Captain Elias in his work. And now that he has passed, it is my duty to assist you." Marcus walked through the ship with K7 following close behind, and he noticed that certain doors remained locked, no matter how many times he tried to open them. The cargo bay would not respond to any command, and the captain's quarters were sealed with a security system that K7 claimed he could not override. "What is in there?" Marcus demanded, but the robot simply tilted his head and said nothing. "My grandfather left me this ship," Marcus said with growing frustration, "so everything on it belongs to me now. Need to open these doors." K7 stood perfectly still for a long moment before responding. "Captain Elias entrusted me with certain duties, Mr. Cole, and I am honor-bound to fulfill them, and when the time is right, you will understand everything." Marcus wanted to argue, but something in the robot's voice made him stop, because there was a weight to those words that suggested secrets far deeper than he could imagine. That night, Marcus explored the parts of the ship he could access, and in a storage compartment beneath the floor of the cockpit, he found a small metal box that had been hidden with great care. Inside was a leather journal filled with handwriting that he recognized from old birthday cards his grandfather had sent when Marcus was a child. And he sat down in the pilot's chair and began to read. The journal told a story that Marcus could barely believe, a story of discoveries and dangers, and a secret that had consumed his grandfather's entire life. The final entry was dated just 2 days before Elias died, and the words hit Marcus like a punch to the chest. If you are reading this, Marcus, then you are the last of our line, and K7 knows everything that I could not tell you while I lived. And when you are ready, truly ready, he will show you what we protected, what all of humanity must one day know. But you must be careful, because they are still searching, and if the Concord finds what we have hidden, they will destroy it and everyone who knows about it. Marcus read those words 3 times before he looked up at K7, who stood in the doorway watching him with those flickering blue eyes. The Concord? Marcus asked, and his voice was barely a whisper, because everyone knew about the Galactic Concord, the coalition of elder races that governed all of known space, and made the laws that every species had to follow. Your grandfather made many enemies, Mr. Cole, K7 said quietly, and they have been searching for this ship for 60 years. And now that he is gone, they will come for you. Marcus wanted to run, wanted to sell this cursed ship and forget everything he had learned. But as he looked at the journal in his hands and thought about the grandfather he had never really known, he realized that running was not an option. Whatever secret Elias Cole had protected was now his responsibility. And whether he wanted it or not, his life had just changed forever. He stood up and faced the old robot with a determination he did not quite feel. Then I guess you better start telling me the truth, K7. Because if people are coming for us, I need to know what we are protecting. K7's optical sensors brightened slightly, and if a robot could smile, Marcus thought he saw one in that moment. Very well, Mr. Cole, the robot said, but I must warn you that the truth is far stranger than anything you have ever imagined, and once you know it, there is no going back. Marcus took a deep breath and nodded, ready to learn the secret that his grandfather had died to protect. 3 weeks passed aboard the Vagrant Dawn, and Marcus learned more about his grandfather in those days than he had learned in his entire life, though K7 still refused to reveal the biggest secrets. The robot shared stories about Elias Cole, about his adventures across the galaxy, and his endless curiosity about ancient civilizations and lost histories. And slowly, Marcus began to see his grandfather not as a fool who had abandoned his family, but as a man carrying a burden too heavy to share. He wanted to contact you many times, K7 explained one evening as they sat in the small galley eating recycled protein. But he feared that any connection to you would put you in danger, and his love for you was shown through his distance, not his absence. Marcus did not know how to feel about this revelation, because part of him still felt the anger of a child who had grown up without a grandfather. But another part of him understood that some secrets were worth protecting at any cost. He tried several times to sell the ship because he needed money, and because he thought that getting rid of the Vagrant Dawn would end whatever danger he was in. But every attempt failed in strange ways. Buyers would suddenly change their minds at the last moment. Communication systems would malfunction during negotiations, and once a potential purchaser simply disappeared without explanation. You are sabotaging my deals, Marcus accused K7 after the 5th failed sale, and the robot did not deny it. There are those who have searched for this vessel for 60 years, Mr. Cole, and selling the ship would expose what must remain hidden, and I cannot allow that to happen. Before Marcus could respond, the station's alarm systems began to scream, and red lights flashed throughout the corridors. A Concord enforcement vessel had arrived at Orbital Station Theta 9, and within hours, Marcus found himself sitting across from a creature that made his blood run. Her name was Serath, and she belonged to the Velkari, one of the eldest races in the galaxy, beings who had traveled between stars, when humans were still living in caves on Earth. She was tall and thin, with skin like polished silver, and eyes that held no warmth at all. And when she spoke, her voice was perfectly calm, in a way that suggested absolute confidence in her own power. "Your grandfather was a thief, Mr. Cole," Serath said, as she studied him with those cold eyes, "and he possessed something that belongs to the Concord, and now that possession has passed to you." "I do not know what you are talking about," Marcus replied, and this was mostly true, because K7 had still not shown him what was hidden in the sealed cargo bay. Serath smiled, but there was no kindness in it. "Your grandfather said the same thing many times over the years, and perhaps you truly are ignorant, but that does not matter, because ignorance is not a defense under Concord." She did not threaten him directly, because she did not need to, and the implication was clear in every word she spoke. Cooperate, or be swept aside like dust before a storm. Marcus returned to his ship with fear pounding in his chest, and found K7 waiting for him in the cockpit, with the engines already warming up. "We must leave immediately, Mr. Cole," the robot said, and Marcus wanted to argue, but the look in those blue optical sensors told him there was no time for debate. "A ship cannot outrun a Concord enforcement vessel," Marcus said as he strapped himself into the pilot's chair. "Their technology is centuries ahead of ours." "This ship is not what it appears to be," K7 replied, and his metal fingers danced across the control panel with a speed that should have been impossible for such an old machine. Panels slid open to reveal systems that Marcus had never seen before, modifications that should not exist on a simple freighter. Military-grade engines, hidden beneath civilian housings, and sensor-dampening hull plating that could fool even the most advanced scanners. "The Vagrant Dawn was not designed to be a cargo ship, Mr. Cole," K7 explained, as the engines roared to life, with a power that shook the entire vessel. "It was designed to run." They launched from the station, just as Serath's ship began to move toward them, and Marcus gripped the controls as the stars stretched into lines around them, and they jumped into hyperspace. For 3 days they ran, jumping from system to system and hiding in asteroid fields and nebulae, while Concord forces searched for them across half the sector. During those desperate hours, K7 shared more stories about Elias, about how he had spent decades evading capture and protecting his secret, and Marcus began to feel a strange pride in the grandfather he had never known. He believed that humanity was destined for something greater than servitude to elder races, K7 said as they drifted in the shadow of a dead moon, and he dedicated his life to proving it. "What did he find?" Marcus asked, and this time, K7 did not deflect the question. "I will show you, Mr. Cole, but you must prepare yourself, because what you are about to see will change everything you believe about your species and your place in this galaxy." K7 led him to the sealed cargo bay and entered a code that caused the heavy doors to slide open with a hiss of ancient air. Inside was not treasure or weapons, but a chamber filled with glowing data crystals arranged in careful rows, thousands of them, containing information that Marcus could not begin to comprehend. And at the center of the room sat a stasis pod, its surface covered in frost, and through the transparent lid, Marcus could see something that made his heart stop. It was a body, perfectly preserved, wearing clothes of a style he had never seen before, and the face was peaceful. Person inside was merely sleeping. But what shocked Marcus most was not the age of the body or the strange technology that surrounded it. What shocked him was that the person inside looked human. "Your grandfather found this 57 years ago on a dead world in uncharted space," K7 said quietly, and the genetic analysis was conclusive beyond any doubt. Marcus stared at the sleeping figure and felt the universe shifting beneath his feet. "This is not an alien, Mr. Cole," the robot continued. "This is an ancestor, and the truth that your grandfather protected is simple and terrible." K7 turned to face Marcus with those ancient blue eyes. Humanity did not originate on Earth, and your species is far older than anyone in this galaxy wants you to know. Marcus looked at the face in the stasis pod, and saw his own features reflected back at him across 1,000,000 years of forgotten history. Everything he had been taught about humanity was a lie, and now he understood why the Concorde was so desperate to find this ship. The secret his grandfather had protected was not just dangerous, it was the truth about who humans really were. Marcus could not sleep for days after learning the truth, and every time he closed his eyes he saw the face of the ancestor in the stasis pod, a human who had lived and died before the elder races had even begun to explore the stars. "How is this possible?" he asked K7 over and over again, and each time the robot patiently explained what Elias had discovered during his decades of secret research. The data crystals in the cargo bay contained records from the civilization that had called itself the Architects, and as Marcus learned to read them with K7's help, a picture emerged that shattered everything he thought he knew about his species. Humanity had not evolved on Earth. They had been placed there, seated on a primitive world, and left to start over, with no memory of who they had once been. Over 1,000,000 years ago, the Architects had ruled a vast empire that stretched across thousands of star systems, and they had been explorers and builders and peacekeepers who believed that every species deserved the chance to grow and flourish. They were not conquerors, K7 explained, as holographic images filled the cargo bay with scenes of ancient cities and starships. They were gardeners who tended the galaxy and helped younger civilizations find their way. But their very nature had frightened the other species who shared the cosmos with them, because humans never stopped growing, and never stopped dreaming, and never accepted that there were limits to what they could achieve. The elder races feared what humanity might become, K7 said, and his voice carried a sadness that Marcus had not heard before. And so they decided to end the threat before it could grow any larger. The war that followed was brief and terrible, and the Architects were scattered across the galaxy, hunted down and destroyed wherever they were found. Those who survived were captured and taken to seed worlds like Earth, their memories erased through technologies that no longer existed, their history buried so deep that even whispers of it were considered dangerous. The Concorde was built on that foundation, K7 continued. An alliance formed to ensure that humanity would never remember what they had been, and for 1,000,000 years they have watched and waited, ready to destroy any evidence that might awaken the sleeping giant. Marcus felt rage building inside him as he listened to this story, a fury so powerful that it frightened him. His entire species had been deceived, reduced from masters of the stars to primitive newcomers who were mocked and dismissed by the very races that had destroyed them. "Why?" he demanded, slamming his fist against the wall. "What gave them the right to decide our fate?" K7 was silent for a long moment before answering. "Fear, Mr. Cole. Simple and terrible fear, because humanity's greatest strength was also what made them dangerous." The robot gestured to the data. "Crystals surrounding them. Your species never accepts defeat, never surrenders to despair, never stops believing that tomorrow can be better than today. And to civilizations that had existed for millions of years in comfortable stagnation, that relentless drive was more terrifying than any weapon." Marcus spent weeks studying the records with K7's guidance, learning about the Architects and their achievements and the worlds they had touched before the end came. He learned that the stasis pod did not just contain an ancestor, but something far more important, a genetic key that could reactivate dormant Architect technology hidden across thousands of planets. They prepared for this, K7 explained, knowing that someday their descendants might return, and they left behind everything humanity would need to reclaim their heritage. Marcus looked at the robot with new understanding. You are not just an old service machine, are you? K7's optical sensors flickered with something that might have been pride. I am a keeper, Mr. Cole, one of the last of my kind, constructed by the architects themselves to watch over their legacy until humanity was ready to receive it. How old are you? Marcus whispered, and the number K7 gave him was so large that it lost all meaning. For over 1,000,000 years, this robot had waited, moving from guardian to guardian, protecting the truth through countless generations, until finally it had found its way to Elias Cole. Your grandfather was the first human in 100,000 years who was truly ready to learn the truth, K7 said, and he spent his life preparing the way for this moment. But learning the truth was only the beginning, because outside the safety of their hidden nebula, Serath and her forces were still searching, and they were not the only ones. The Concord was fracturing as different factions learned about the Vagrant Dawn and what it carried. The evidence forever, others wanting to use it for their own power, and a few believing that the time had finally come for humanity to know what they had lost. What do we do now? Marcus asked, feeling the weight of 1,000,000 years pressing down on his shoulders. K7 turned to face him with those ancient blue eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall. We have a choice, Mr. Cole. We can hide and protect the secret as your grandfather did, or we can share it with all of humanity and let them decide their own fate. Marcus thought about Earth and the colonies and the billions of humans scattered across the stars who had no idea what they truly were. He thought about the way other species looked at humans with contempt, dismissing them as children who had barely learned to walk among the stars. And he thought about his grandfather, who had spent his entire life protecting this truth, waiting for someone who would have the courage to share it. There has to be a way, Marcus said, and his voice grew stronger as he spoke. A way to tell everyone at once, so the Concord cannot stop it. K7 nodded slowly. There is, Mr. Cole. The architects built a communications array at the heart of the galaxy, a beacon that can reach every corner of known space, and if we can activate it, we can broadcast the truth to every human world simultaneously. Marcus looked at the face in the stasis pod, at this ancestor who had waited 1,000,000 years to be found, and he made his decision. Then that is where we are going, he said, and whatever is waiting for us, we will face it together. K7 placed a metal hand on Marcus's shoulder, and for the first time since they had met, the robot's voice carried something like warmth. Your grandfather would be proud, Mr. Cole. You have the spirit of the architects within you, and that spirit is what will save your species. Marcus smiled, despite the fear that still churned in his stomach, because he knew that the hardest part of their journey was still ahead. But for the first time in his life, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, carrying a torch that had been passed down through generations, ready to light a fire that would change the galaxy forever. The journey to the galactic core would take months, and Marcus knew they could not make it alone. So K7 guided them to a hidden station on the edge of a dying star, where others who shared their mission had gathered. These were the people his grandfather had worked with for decades, a secret network of believers who had suspected the truth about humanity long before they had proof. Dr. Yuki Tanaka was the first to greet them when they arrived, a small woman with sharp eyes and gray hair who had spent her life studying ruins that the Concord had tried to bury. Your grandfather saved my career, she told Marcus, as they walked through the station's crowded corridors. I found architect artifacts on 7 different worlds, and every time the Concord shut down my research and threatened my funding, Elias was there to help me continue in secret. She had compiled evidence from dozens of dig sites, fragments of a puzzle that only made sense when combined with the data. Crystals aboard the Vagrant Dawn. I always knew we were more than what they told us, Yuki said with fierce determination in her voice. And now we can prove it. There were others too, humans from every corner of settled space who had come to fight for a truth they could feel in their bones, even before they could prove it with evidence. And there were aliens as well, members of species who had their own reasons to oppose the Concord's lies. Vorn was a massive Grethaki, a being covered in thick scales, with 4 arms, and a face that looked terrifying until you saw the kindness in his eyes. His species had their own legends about ancient allies who had helped them survive a plague that nearly destroyed their civilization, allies who had looked remarkably human, and the Concord had spent centuries trying to erase those stories. My people owe a debt that can never be repaid, Vorn told Marcus in a voice like grinding rocks. And if helping you reveals the truth, so be it. Truth? Then perhaps we can finally honor those who saved us. Together they planned their mission, studying star charts and Concord patrol routes, and the defenses that surrounded the galactic core. The beacon was hidden within a hollow dwarf star, protected by fields and barriers that had kept it safe for 1,000,000 years, and reaching it would require them to fight through whatever forces the Concord sent to stop them. They will come with everything they have. Serath's image appeared on their screens one day, transmitted from her ship across the vast darkness of space. And I will be leading them. Marcus stared at the Valkyrie investigator who had hunted his grandfather for decades, wondering why she was contacting them instead of simply attacking. I am not your enemy, Marcus Cole, Serath said, and there was something in her voice that he had not heard before. I have spent my entire life enforcing laws that I am now beginning to question. Told them that the Concord was splitting apart as news of the vagrant dawn spread through the highest levels of government, with some factions demanding immediate destruction of the evidence, while others argued for a different approach. There are those among my people who believe the time has come to end this lie, Serath continued, and though I cannot help you openly, I can tell you that not all who pursue you wish to see you fail. The transmission ended before Marcus could respond, leaving him to wonder how many secret allies they might have among the very forces sent to destroy them. As the weeks passed, their small fleet grew as ships arrived from across the galaxy, old freighters and modified transports, and even a few stolen military vessels, crewed by humans who had heard whispers of what they were attempting. K7 worked tirelessly to prepare the vagrant dawn for the journey ahead, and during the long nights when Marcus could not sleep, the robots shared more of the architect's history. They were not perfect, K7 admitted one evening as they sat together in the cargo bay. They made mistakes, and sometimes their ambition caused harm. But they always tried to be better, always believed that growth was possible, period. Marcus thought about his own life, the years he had spent on that dying station, feeling like he was trapped in a cage with no key. And he understood now that the cage had been built not by his circumstances, but by the lies that had kept humanity small. Why did my grandfather not share this with everyone? He asked, and K7 was quiet for a long moment before answering. He was afraid, Mr. Cole, afraid that humanity was not ready, that the truth would cause chaos and destruction instead of awakening. But in the end he realized that the choice was not his to make. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding that his grandfather had passed that choice to him, and he had already made his decision. Came when their fleet was ready, 53 ships crewed by humans and aliens who believed in their mission, facing an armada of Concord vessels that outnumbered them 10-1. The battle began at the edge of the core, explosions lighting up the darkness as their small fleet fought desperately to create a path for the vagrant dawn. Ships were lost in the first minutes, brave people who had come from across the galaxy to fight for a truth they would never live to see, and Marcus felt each death like a wound in his own heart. Vorn's ship took the lead, absorbing fire that would have destroyed smaller vessels, his voice roaring over the communications channel as he cleared a path through the enemy lines. Yuki coordinated their movements from a command ship, her brilliant mind finding patterns in the chaos that allowed them to survive longer than anyone had expected. And through it all, K7 stood beside Marcus on the bridge of the vagrant dawn, through the storm of fire and death, toward the distant glow of the beacon. They were almost through, when a Concorde warship appeared directly in their path, and there was no time to evade. "Brace for impact!" Marcus shouted, but K7 moved faster than he could see, pushing him aside as the enemy's weapons tore through the hull. The explosion threw Marcus across the bridge, and when he opened his eyes, he saw K7 lying on the floor, with half his chassis destroyed. "K7!" Marcus scrambled to the robot's side, cradling his metal head in his hands. The ancient keeper's optical sensors flickered weakly. "I have fulfilled my purpose, Mr. Cole. I have delivered the truth to one who will share it." "No," Marcus said, tears streaming down his face. "You cannot leave me now. We are so close." K7 reached up with his one remaining arm and touched Marcus's face with gentle metal fingers. "I am not leaving, Mr. Cole. I am transferring my core memories into the ship's computer. Everything I have seen, everything I know, it will all be preserved." The robot's eyes dimmed as data flowed from his ancient processors into the vagrant dawn's systems. "Now fulfill your purpose, Marcus Cole, and when humanity awakens, tell them that their keepers never stopped believing in them." K7's light went dark, and Marcus knelt alone on the shattered bridge, holding the empty shell of the friend who had waited 1,000,000 years to see this moment. But there was no time for grief, because the beacon was ahead, and the future of humanity was waiting. The vagrant dawn limped through the final barrier with smoke pouring from its wounds and systems failing one by one. But Marcus kept his hands on the controls and his eyes on the light ahead. The beacon emerged from the heart of the dwarf star like a dream made solid, a structure so vast and ancient that it made the greatest achievements of the Concorde look like children's toys. Towers of crystal and metal reached outward in every direction, connected by bridges of light that pulsed with energy that had been waiting for 1,000,000 years to be released. As the vagrant dawn approached, something began to change, because the beacon recognized the genetic key that Marcus carried in his blood, the heritage of the architects that had survived across countless generations. Lights that had been dark since before recorded history flickered to life, spreading outward from the center like a wave of awakening, and across the galaxy, on thousands of worlds, other architect installations began to stir. Marcus landed his battered ship on a platform that seemed to grow from the beacon's surface to receive him, and when he stepped outside, he felt the weight of history pressing against his skin. The ancestor from the stasis pod walked beside him now, awakened by the beacon's energy, a woman named Arya, who had been the last keeper of this place before the fall. "You came," she said, and her voice carried wonder and relief and hope. "After all this time, you finally came home." She guided him through corridors that seemed to shift and change around them, responding to their presence like a living thing, until they reached a chamber at the heart of the beacon. In the center stood a console of light, designed for human hands, waiting for someone to give it a command. "This is the voice of the architects," Arya explained, "and from here you can speak to every corner of the galaxy, to every human world, to every person who carries the blood of our people." Marcus looked at the console and felt fear rising in his chest, because this was the moment that would change everything, and once he acted, there would be no going back. "What do I say?" he asked, and his voice sounded small in the vast chamber. Arya smiled and placed her hand over his heart. "Say the truth, Marcus Cole, because that is all humanity has ever needed. The truth about who they are and what they can become." Behind them, the sounds of battle grew louder as Concord forces began to penetrate the beacon's outer defenses. And Marcus knew he had only minutes before they reached the chamber. He stepped forward and placed his hands on the console, and the beacon responded to his touch with a surge of power that made every nerve in his body sing. Across the galaxy, screens flickered and speakers crackled, as Marcus Cole's voice reached every human ear simultaneously. "My name is Marcus Cole," he began. "To you from the heart of the galaxy, from a place that was built by your ancestors 1,000,000 years ago." He told them everything, about the architects and their empire, about the betrayal that had scattered humanity across the stars, about the lies that had kept them small and afraid for generation after generation. "We were not always newcomers," he said, and his voice grew stronger with each word. "We were explorers and builders and dreamers who touched every corner of this galaxy before we were destroyed by those who feared what we might become." He showed them the evidence, the data crystals and the records, and the face of Arya, who stood beside him as proof of everything he claimed. "The Concord wanted us to forget," Marcus continued. "They wanted us to believe that we were primitive and insignificant, that our best days were ahead of us instead of behind us, but they were wrong." He could feel the beacon's power flowing through him now, connecting him to billions of human minds across thousands of worlds. "Our best days are not behind us," he declared, "because the spirit that built an empire of stars still lives in every one of us, and no lie can ever truly destroy what we are." The Concord soldiers reached the chamber just as Marcus finished speaking, but they did not attack, because they could see the screens behind him showing the reactions from across the galaxy. On Earth, people were pouring into the streets, looking up at the sky with new eyes. On the colonies, workers were setting down their tools and embracing each other as the truth sank in. And on hundreds of worlds, dormant architect technology was awakening. Ships and stations and devices that had slept for 1,000,000 years, responding to the call of their creators' descendants. Serath pushed through the soldiers and stood before Marcus with an expression he had never seen on a Velkari face before. "It is done," she said quietly. "Truth is out, and there is nothing anyone can do to put it back." Marcus nodded, exhausted beyond words, but feeling a peace he had never known before. The weeks that followed were chaos and wonder and fear and hope, all mixed together, as humanity struggled to understand what they had learned, and the Concord fractured into factions that would take generations to sort out. Some of the elder races demanded punishment, claiming that Marcus had committed the greatest crime in galactic history, by revealing secrets that were meant to stay buried forever. Others called for peace, acknowledging that the original sin belonged to their ancestors, and that the time had come to make amends. And humanity itself was divided, with some wanting revenge for the 1,000,000 years of lies, while others simply wanted to move forward and reclaim the heritage that had been stolen from them. Marcus returned to the Vagrant Dawn, where he found that K7's memory transfer had been successful, and though the robot's old body was gone, his consciousness lived on in the ship's computer. "You did it, Mr. Cole," K7's voice said from the speakers. "You fulfilled your purpose and awakened your species. I wish you could have seen it with your own eyes." "I saw it through yours," K7 replied, "and that was enough." In the months that followed, Marcus worked with Yuki and Vorn and hundreds of others to explore the awakened architect installations, discovering technology and history that would take centuries to fully understand. Arya became a teacher, sharing the wisdom of the ancient architects with eager students who lined up from across the galaxy to learn. And slowly, carefully, humanity began to rebuild what they had lost, not as conquerors seeking revenge, but as the gardeners their ancestors had been, helping younger civilizations grow while healing the wounds of the past. Marcus stood on the bridge of the Vagrant Dawn one morning, looking out at a fleet of newly awakened architect vessels, crewed by humans who had answered the call to explore. K7's voice came from beside him, warm and familiar despite coming from a speaker. "Where shall we go, Mr. Cole?" Marcus thought about his grandfather, who had spent his entire life protecting a secret so that this moment could happen, and about K7, who had waited 1,000,000 years for humanity to come home. He thought about the ancestor in the stasis pod, and the billions of humans who were now looking at the stars with new understanding. And he smiled, because he finally knew the answer. "Everywhere," he said, "we have got 1,000,000 years of catching up to do." The Vagrant Dawn's engines roared to life, and Marcus Cole led humanity back to the stars, where they had always belonged. The architects had not fallen, they had simply been sleeping, and now at last, humanity was awake.